What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 38 of the Busted Buttons Video Game Podcast. And we've spent so much time, basically the last 6 months, talking about the next-gen consoles, which I'm loving mine, by the way, not to rub it in there, Nick.
But it took you 20 seconds to get into the podcast that already rubbed in my face that I still don't have a next-gen console yet?
Hey, I gotta get my shots in while I can, but we spent so much time talking next gen, we wanted to kind of shift gears for this episode and spend some time talking about retro gaming. It's something we've hit on here and there throughout the history of our podcast, but never really dedicated a full episode to, retro gaming, why we love it, what stands out about it. So that's what we're getting into today, and I think what really brought this on, at least for you, Hick, is you've been playing through this game called New Super Lucky's Tale, and I know we mentioned it in the last episode or two, and you really enjoyed it, but you mentioned that once you beat the game, it kind of spits these retro levels at you, so I think that's kind of our jumping point for wanting to do a retro-geared episode, so I'm going to kick it over to you to get us started. Well, first of all, I guess I should say what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I was like, okay, we're going to talk about the first topic and then go from there.
I just got carried away, making fun of you for not having a next-gen console. But we're going to talk about, the music and sounds, just the experience of playing these games as kids, the simplicity, not in terms of difficulty, but in terms of controls, how original games were back then, the nostalgia factor, and then, even though we're going to talk about retro games, we're kind of talk about why we don't really play them all that much, even though we love them. So now I'm going to kick it over to you. Like I said, New Super Lucky's Tale kind of really got the wheels turning for retro gaming for you. So how about you dive into that a little bit and take us through that?
And what's crazy is it didn't happen until the very end of the game. Like, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but not too much. Like, after you beat the game, like, you get, like, another world. Like, it happens in a lot of games where you play these levels. And these levels, they're retro levels. Like, they have a lot of that blue and pink colors that you see kind of, with the whole Miami Vice. And then the Miami Heat also have those jerseys. So that kind of has, like, a retro feel to it. And then it has kind of like a synthwave musical sound to it, which also is very 80s, 90s retro. And also, it's very cool. This screen actually looks like a tube TV, so they kind of cut off the edges and make it black, and it's so cool. And the graphics are a little bit blurry too, which you wouldn't think you would like too much, but kind of going along with what they're doing in those levels, it works really well. And I gotta be honest with you, Red, it's probably the most fun I've had in gaming in a very long time because New Super Lucky's Tale. First of all, people, I'm not really going to go to the game right now because we're talking about retro stuff. But really quickly, I finished up the game, Red. I am going to give it an 8.8. I think it is that good of a game. One of the better 3D platformers I've played in a while. Recommend it for everybody. I think it's on PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox. But we'll talk more about the game one day. But just playing through these levels and just the fun I was having, like, it obviously reminded me of playing video games in the 80s and 90s. And even though you get these indie games that, use those styles, those 8-bit styles or those 16-bit, sprites, it still doesn't feel to me, it feels a little retro, but this, like, took me back and it made me feel like I was actually playing games as a kid. And like you said, they inspired me. Like, I know I shot you a couple topics. Hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And before we knew it, a pattern started. And we're like, hey, let's do a whole retro episode because, like Red said in the intro, we don't play a lot of retro games nowadays, but that doesn't mean that the love is still not there. Like, we still love talking about games of yesteryear or yesterday, whatever you're saying it is. I think it is yesteryear. Anyway,
yesteryear. I like yesteryear.
Just,
I like that.
We play them here and there, but for the most part, it's a time thing, and we'll get into that later on. But I know you've not played New Super Lucky's Tale. You really do have to play it. It's a very quick game. It's very fun, but just playing through these levels, it just took me back, and that's what good retro games or retro levels do for you.
Well, for sure, and that's like something that hit me, I think, when you first started talking about this, when we were kind of prepping for this and planning for this, is like Super Mario Odyssey. Those sections of, and I know it's weird to talk about Odyssey and retro gaming, but in Odyssey, those sections where you go to the 2D side scrolling, and they bring back some of those graphics from ancient Mario games.
And I love to use the first game and not the third game or the second. Why would you use the second game? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. But no, like, so just those segments, like, I love how, like you said, Super Lucky's Tale does, like, it opens up a whole world worth of, like, retro levels, but, like, just the way Odyssey
it's not the whole world, but it's like a third of it.
Oh, okay, I got you. But like the way Odyssey just incorporates it naturally into the regular 3D worlds, I thought was so well done, and it gave you that sense of nostalgia and that throwback. Like parts like going through like the New Donk City Festival, and almost that entire thing is like the side scrolling, and you even get like the original Donkey Kong level, just that kind of throwback in a modern game is just so much fun to experience. And it does make you want to go back and fire up those old games sometimes. And I do know every now and then I will get drunk. Shocking. Every now and then I get drunk. And
that wasn't the every now and then. What you were about to say after that was going to be the every now and then.
Right. But every now and then, like you get, I'll get drunk and be like, oh man, that old game was amazing. I'm going to bust out the Wii, or bust out like I've got a knockoff Sega Genesis thing up in my closet. It's just like, and play one of these old games. And usually the next morning you wake up and you're like, why the fuck did I do that? That was actually terrible looking back. Yep. But usually it's the headache talking.
Yes.
But anyway, I love when modern games do try to incorporate some of that retro feel to it, because, that is the era of gaming that we grew up in. Like we grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, is like right when like the NES and then the SNES were taking off. And so many of our foundational gaming memories go back to that. And it's just, anytime you get that retro, it takes us back to being kids. And it really is fun. And you mentioned this game and like that retro stuff is some of the most fun you've had in a while. And I really do think that some of that is, it just strikes that chord with when we were kids. But one of the biggest reasons why, other than those, the pink and blue colors, which, by the way, those Miami Heat jerseys are sweet.
They are awesome.
I don't care what anybody says. And when they do the court that way, it looks amazing.
It does.
Anyway,
it looks awesome.
But what really sticks out to us is the sound.
Yeah.
Like the sound of games back then. Like it was all like on these synthesizers, this just really like low technology, but they're songs that still stick with us, through today. So let's talk a little bit about kind of that retro music and sound. What really jumps out to you when you think about old games and that music and sound?
First of all, what jumps out is the actual games, like, your Mario games, your Zelda games, and those, with Zelda, the overworld, we all know it. It's been a ton of games. But back in those days, developers just had to get more creative with limited technology. And I think that's what made those sounds so special, because they are very simple sounds, but they're so memorable, obviously, like I said, with Mario and Zelda, and just like, they're so, I don't know, it's just crazy that they took like this limited technology and they were able to create that. Because nowadays we have like, symphonies in games, and like, the soundtracks are very awesome for games nowadays. But we'll talk about simplicity later on. But those simple sounds just, they really stuck with you, and I don't know exactly how to go about.
Why.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's why they were simple.
I'm a big fan. I don't know if you're trying to talk right there, but I'm still going. I'm still talking. All right.
Keep rolling.
I'm a huge fan of synthwave. If you don't know about it, it's like basically this music that people make nowadays, and there's a lot of mixes on YouTube and stuff. But and a lot of it is instrumental. There's not any words in it. There are some that has words, but a lot of the games, and that's also the synthwave. It uses a lot of synthesizers, which is, first of all, something I just really, really love that sound. Now, not all games in those days, well, back in the early days, they could only use certain sounds to, because of the technology. So a lot of them did use that, but just that whole synthesizer sound, that whole synthwave sound, that goes back to 80s and 90s games, and I still listen to it today. And I think a lot of the reasons why I listen to it today is because it takes me back to the time when I played video games, like, in the 80s, in the early 90s. And I've said this, like, a lot of times, like, I think me and you, when we were born like, what, in 83 and 85? I think we were so lucky, like, for the time period that we were born in relation to video gaming, because I think growing up, like I had the Atari actually too, but I think growing up with the Atari, the NES, and the SNES, like that was the best time to be alive as in a gamer, because like
it was
those
amazing.
Still carry, like you can still go back and play those games today. Whereas like somebody started on the PS1 or the PS2, you're not hearing about people going back and playing those games because those graphics look like shit nowadays. So
that was a weird transitional time for games.
I always feel lucky that we were alive during that time. And we got to experience the NES and the SNES, which is really what I consider retro. I guess you could throw the Nintendo 64 in there, but I always think NES and SNES and Sega Genesis. But
Of course,
just the whole sound. I mean, I just love the whole sound of that time and a lot like of that era, like, you know, in general.
Yes.
And a lot of that sound for me being a gamer comes from video games. So what's your opinion on the whole retro sound and going back to the 80s and 90s?
Well, so much of that, like music in general back then and not just video game music, was kind of like that. You know, you hear that style of 80s pop. You hear like 80s pop, like everything was these synthesizers, these really upbeat stuff. I mean, you think back to like a movie like Scarface or something that like it was filled with this amazing 80s music. And I feel like the games back then did an excellent job of, even though, yes, their technology was so much more limited than a movie or a TV show because you were stuck with a little 8 or 16-bit cartridge. You couldn't do too much. Yeah. But like they captured that pop sound of that era so well. And I do think that like it's so easy to hear, like you could hear one of those. And obviously, yeah, you know, people are, the indie scene especially has been like recapturing some of that. But man, you just hear those music and you're like, oh yeah, that belongs in that era. Even with, like you mentioned, that limited technology they had to work with. And they still came up with catchy, amazing tunes and innovative tunes that fit that time period so well. Because, I mean, like I said, Scarface is like where I go for my 80s references. And that may not be the best, you know, source, whatever. I mean, it's a, you know, it's an Al Pacino movie. It's amazing. But like you hear that music and the soundtrack to it, and that has a very distinct time period style.
What movie are you talking about again?
Scarface.
Oh, Scarface. Okay, I didn't hear you say that. So I thought that's the one you were talking about, but I wasn't positive.
Sorry, at least I hope I said that. I meant to. But anyway, I'm talking about Scarface. Yeah, But like it had that music that fit that era, that pop, upbeat pop music. And I think that like the NES and the SNES and the Sega Genesis for that matter, really, and we'll talk a little bit less about the Sega because I think you and I were both Nintendo guys, so apologies to Sega.
And we didn't have the money to buy both systems back then, so I never had a Sega Genesis or a Sega Saturn. I believe you were in the same boat, maybe.
Yeah, I got whatever my parents bought me.
Yep. Hey, at least they bought it for us.
Hey, yeah, thank goodness. I wish they'd buy me something else now, but shit, we're too grown up for that. But
well, at least anyway, you found one, you asshole. See, here you go again, man.
I got to keep twisting that knife while I can before you get
it
one.
Hurts already, man. It hurts. Stop.
Yeah, but so like I just loved how the music of those games fit the period so well, and I'm really glad like you hit on how simple the tracks were, and that's where we're kind of talking over each other for just a second, because it's like that simplicity is why they stick with us. I mean, you can sit here and whistle the Zelda overworld theme, the original Mario world theme, because they were very simple, very catchy, and they played on a loop. Let's be honest. They just played on a really continuous loop, and it got in your head. And even now, 20, 25 years later for us, or maybe a few years longer than that, but, you know, years and years later, we can still whistle the Mario Brothers theme, the Zelda overworld theme, because they were simple and catchy, because shit, they didn't have the technology to do anything but simple back then.
But it's something that they created. Like, you know, like nowadays, like a lot of times, because I want to say that the reason like why I like the sound so much is because it fit the 80s and 90s. It perfectly did. And here's where I'm kind of going to say it, but I'm going to kind of be wrong on what I say. I don't feel like music really captures the time period that we're in now, but at the same time, there's a lot of games that you actually use music from now and like, you know, now and today. Right. So, but this is one thing I don't like all those sounds, the developers create those sounds. Nowadays, a lot, like we still get music that's created for games, but for example, Forza, like, you know, which I don't think they really want to do their own soundtrack, but well, they did in 6 actually. But anyways, like a lot of times, like they just use music, like, you know, songs
they license out,
that are out, and like, you know, I like that, but it's just kind of lazy. Like, create your own sound for the game. And like, I really miss that because yes, we still get it with a lot of games nowadays, but there's also a lot of games where they just take songs that are out and that's the music in the game. And I miss that creativity. But, you know, anyways, hearing amazing sound, like, you know, was a cool experience as a kid, but there's also a lot of other experiences that made retro gaming great for us. And I kind of just want to kick it to you here, and I'm going to actually ask you, what was one of your best experiences as a kid playing video games?
Well, I think, and this is kind of, it's interesting. Back then, you could only get a couple of games a year.
Yeah.
Because games were still $50 back then. Yes. I mean, they were $50 back then, and you know, you were counting on either your allowance or your parents to buy you a game. So for me, just that feeling of getting a new game was something you looked forward to so much. Yeah. You begged your parents. It was either your birthday or Christmas.
Yep.
You were asking for a game. So there may have been 2 or 3 times a year that you actually got a new game, unless you some people come from different backgrounds. You may have got more games more often, whatever. But for you and me, I feel like we were in the same boat. That anticipation of getting a new game, because let's be honest, back then you got a game, a Nintendo game, Super Nintendo game, they're relatively short. You would play that game over and over and over and over for 6 months, 8 months, until the time came to finally get a new game. You didn't have fucking Steam sales back then filling up your backlog.
Yes. We had birthdays in June, so we actually got one over a half year. We got one for Christmas.
We were spaced
and then we also
out.
got one in June, so that worked out well for both of us.
It really did. But to me, just like that feeling of anticipation is something like we've kind of lost now, because at any time you could find a sale for a game anywhere and just pick it up. And that's why we have backlogs that are stupid ridiculous now. And like, even, yes, I was looking forward to, obviously, Cyberpunk 2077, looking forward to like Star Wars Squadrons, Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Halo Infinite, whenever it does come out down the line. Like, yes, those are all games I'm looking forward to, but I'm not sitting there like, I'm not getting another game until those come out.
Yeah.
Like, we can buy games whenever the hell we want.
Yeah.
We're in a fortunate situation like that.
Yep.
So it's just,
or there's great sales, like you said.
Or there's great sales. Yeah, I mean, we just had Black Friday. I mean, we have... Steam has sales every other freaking week.
Ridiculous,
it seems
man.
like.
That'll get you into PC gaming alone. It's just going to the Steam summer sale and just checking out some of those games. But like, I actually want to. Did you have anything else you want to say right there?
No, that was just like when you mentioned like, hey, what was your biggest thing? Like, just the anticipation was so huge. But I'll let you take over.
For Christmas. I mean, and this is what kind of sucks, especially for me, because I know you buy physical games, but I I buy all digital now. So like, I kind of lost that whole. Like you get something for Christmas, you unwrap it, and it's a game, and that was so much fun. And we're going to talk about
blown away, right?
We have multiple experiences that we're going to talk about throughout right here. But I'm actually going to take it to where you probably don't think I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it to River Falls Mall and actually the arcade, man. Like, I mean, I had great experiences on the NES and SNES. I'm going to talk about those. But I remember going to River Falls Mall, and they had that awesome arcade in there, which is really one of the only arcades that was in the area, because back in the day,
we lived
arcades,
in the boonies. We lived in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's one reason. But arcades, they were expensive to run, because I believe a lot of times those machines broke down. Now, I didn't play the arcades a lot because, let's put it this way, my quarter would go very, very quickly on those arcade machines, because you had to be really good or you got off of there fast. But I just remember going there.
They were made to take your money.
Yeah, all the sounds and all the joysticks and the buttons. Like, first of all, River Falls Mall. We've talked about this before. If y'all don't know about it, is a mall in Indiana. Check it out. Very, very close by Louisville. It's not there anymore. It's you know how malls.
Nope,
how malls are going nowadays. They're struggling a little bit, but
I'm pretty sure that's where the Bass Pro is.
Yeah,
now,
it is. But just back in those days, I mean, seeing that arcade, which is really the only arcade I went to, like, that was just a great experience. But just really sitting down and like playing games without having responsibilities as an adult, like, was enjoyable. Like, you could sit there, and why I like this, I don't know, but I enjoyed sitting on the floor, like, by the TV, because you had to play close because of the wires. I think they were like 6 foot at the time, so
they weren't nearly long enough.
Like, a lot of my memories are just there sitting on the floor, playing the NES or an SNES game and just playing for hours on end. And like, you couldn't go out and buy all the games you want to. At least we couldn't, because we were younger. But at the same time, we didn't have all the responsibilities that we have as adults. We have more time that we, like back then, that we don't have as adults. And it just, like, that right there is a great memory for me. But also, man, and this is, I understand this. I contributed to this. But like, this is one thing that sucks. And that was like all the gaming stores back in the day. Yeah, we still have like, GameStop, which you all know our opinions on GameStop. They're not very flattering. But back in the day, there was gaming stores everywhere. And you just walk in, you see these games all over the place. And here's one thing that they did great that a lot of places don't do anymore. I believe you talked about this actually with Walmart, is they had systems and TVs in their stores that actually worked.
They had the kiosks.
Yeah, the kiosks. Exactly. Like nowadays, you either don't have those or they don't work. And I miss going into a store and playing a game. And so I'm going to kick it to you right here, because I believe you talked about doing this with your 3 brothers. I know that's something that you missed.
Oh, absolutely. Like, not just like the going into the... First of all, just everything about the physical games I kind of miss now. Just to kind of piggyback on what you were mentioning, like, just being able to walk into a game store and browse the aisles. Now you click on Steam and you scroll through computer window after, or, the PlayStation store or the Xbox store, and you're just looking at a screen.
Yeah. But I'm part of the problem because that's what I do.
Yeah, I know. Me too. But being able to pick up the box off the shelf and look at it and
after they unlock the glass case, you know how it used to work back in the day. Still does work that way, actually.
Well, of course, those Nintendo cartridge boxes were pretty huge back then, but you couldn't just walk out the store with it.
No, you couldn't, sadly.
I remember having that Walmart there close to our hometown, and that's what got me and my brothers to get a Nintendo 64. They had a Mario Kart 64 set up, and every time the parents would go to the grocery, I'll be over there in the electronics section playing the Nintendo 64, and it worked. You're absolutely right. It's not something where some little asshat came and broke it. Although, back then I was the little asshat. I was the young, 8-year-old kid playing the but I never broke it. So, but just that experience of getting to try out games, and it sold us on it. It sold that me and one of my brothers were going to go in on this together, and it was totally worth it. And you just don't get that anymore. I remember when we were looking.
Wait. So who was the brother that was not in on it?
Oh, Ken. He was older. So me and the brother that was closer to me in age, we got in on it together. But nowadays, I remember when we were looking for the Series X and the PlayStation 5, and you're on Walmart's website or you're on Target's website, and they're all these stores say there's not, every now and then you would see a store that says there's one available to demo. Yeah. There's one sitting out. But it was very, very limited in only a few locations. And that was a huge selling point back then. And, we've mentioned, playing with the brothers, playing with the siblings. I've talked about that on past episodes. That ability to just sit there. You got 3 controllers plugged in with their wires. You're trying not to get them all crossed. It's like Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams, right? And so we'd sit there and play Mario Kart, GoldenEye once the 64 era came out, just all those awesome multiplayer games. Or even if you're not playing multiplayer, if you die, you hand the controller to the other person. Playing Mario, you lose a life, the other person gets the controller. All those aspects of the physical gaming, and also just back before there was that online multiplayer, man. And I get it. Online multiplayer has made a ton of people a lot of friends. It's kept friends together when they move away and get older. I get that. I support it. But something's lost. I mean, other than just the little assholes screaming that they're going to kill your mom or something on Xbox Live when they beat you. But, it's something's lost when you're doing it online instead of there with your sibling, with your best friend, whatever it is. And so everything that comes with owning a physical game is a bit of a cherished memory. And I think that's part of why I still like getting physical games, especially as gifts, because, the girlfriend knows I love video games. She knows what games I like. And she's very much I will get it for you. Do you care if it's a disc? I'm no, I enjoy opening that up still. That takes me back to my younger days. I do have to take one minor jab at GameStop right now. You mentioned them, and I can't let that slide without giving them an FU. The girlfriend went in there to buy me a game, and she's they hassled me about signing up for a rewards or the power-up program. She's they asked her and asked her and asked her, and trying to read off all these benefits. And GameStop, I get it. That's they have to. It's their corporate mandate. And finally, she's I think my fucking boyfriend's got one. Here's his name. Look him up. So fuck you, GameStop, for harassing my girlfriend. But that's my jab at GameStop for right now. But I do miss that feeling of physical games and game stores. It's just not the same anymore. What are some other things though about experiencing that as kids? I know we've talked about the arcades, the sound, the physical. What else is there that really jumped out?
I kind of want to go back to your whole physical thing. I do digital now, but a lot of it's just I'm not a lazy person, but I'm a convenient person. Though. And if I could just switch a game off in the dashboard rather than getting up and putting it in the actual system, I'm all about that convenience, man. But another thing is, my 3 kids, they got a lot of shit, man. And this shit is all over the place, and I hate clutter. And so that's kind of why I've also gotten away from those physical games, because it's just more clutter. It's just something that takes up more space. But, man, I do miss getting that. And then also, I kind of want to talk about, you talk about your siblings and how you had all your experiences with them. most of my experiences during that time were with my best friend. At that time, I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years, but I don't even know what he's doing anymore. But my friend Levi, happens. Like me and him, like he like, I had another friend, but me and Levi are the ones that play video games the most, and we would just sit there and he kind of talked about switching off and stuff. We would play Mario. We would not Zelda because he does only one person, but he actually got me into Zelda with Link to the Past. But we played sports games or whatever games that we were playing at the time, and we just sit there and we would play for hours, especially during the winter. Like we take turns or we play against each other, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. And, those are just great memories right there because, we played sports together. So we played outside a lot, but we also, love video games. Like, we had the best of both worlds. So, it's hard to explain. It's not hard to explain to people, but just, like I've kind of talked about, I think that was the best era to grow up in gaming.
It really was.
We kind of talked to, we'll go to simplicity. Here in actually, you know what? No, I don't want to go to it yet. But, because I want to ask you about something right here. I'm going to kind of not switch off topics, but kind of go a different direction. Do you remember walking into we talk about game stores. Do you remember walking into Toys R Us and just seeing, we talk about kiosk. They had like 4 at a station.
Oh, man.
They had like freaking aisles, not just like a cabinet or two. They had freaking aisles of games, man. And just walking into Toys R Us, they had a lot of toys, but that was also video game heaven.
It really was. Toys R Us was an amazing store. You can still sing that stupid song from their freaking commercials. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. And it sucks that they've pretty much not entirely disappeared.
Oh, they're gone.
Are they entirely
gone?
Well,
I kind of heard that they were trying to come back, but then come back as a different brand, and then they're going to come back as Toys R Us. But I don't think really anything's happened, or at least that I've heard.
No, and I don't think, I haven't seen one in ages, not here where we live, but man.
Well, they did all shut down there for a period, but then they were talking about coming back.
But you're absolutely right, though, because when you have an entire store dedicated to, toys and kid stuff, you can have aisles upon aisles worth of video game stuff because A, that shit's expensive, so they get a lot of money, but B, it's that's a huge part of a lot of childhoods, and once you get past the action figures and G.I. Joes, whatever, the next natural transition is video games, I feel like. And it's just I loved walking into a store like Toys R Us. Yeah, we talked about the GameStop and the video game oriented ones, but any of those big box stores, your Walmarts, your Targets, your Toys R Us's had a massive selection of video games in that electronics section. And man, that was always a mecca to walk into. And you're like, there's so much. And you're like you said, there's kiosks, there's cabinets, there's everything going on. So I do agree, walking into something like a Toys R Us was a great feeling. And there's one other thing you did kind of hit on a minute ago before we do move on. You mentioned the going to the arcades. I love that arcade bars are becoming a big thing now.
I've not been to one, but I really want to go.
Oh my God. It's been going on. It's been kind of coming for the last couple of years. We have several right here in our town that I absolutely love it. Actually, I was in one just a couple weekends ago, and you just walk in and it's literally just all these arcade cabinets from the 80s and the 90s and just games that I know we didn't have a lot of arcades. Like you mentioned River Falls. I remember playing the X-Men arcade game at the Georgetown Drive-In Theater.
Oh, that's old school right there.
And so just walking into these arcade bars and you see these ancient games, you see Donkey Kong, Frogger, all those games, the side scrollings like your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You got the House of the Dead with the little light guns. The arcade bars becoming a big thing is so much fun, and it really, really hits a special nerve for people our age that grew up in gaming.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a lot of arcades. Arcades weren't really our thing. But just to be able to walk into this place now as an adult, buy a beer, and then play the games for free is amazing. I absolutely love that arcade bars are becoming a big thing. But that was, like I said, I remember you hit on the arcades.
I don't know why I've not been to an arcade bar yet. I really want to go. I'm going to put that. Well, I don't know if it's a good time to go right now, but I'm going to, once this whole pandemic situation gets figured out, I'm definitely going to put that on my to-do list because I have no excuse for why. Well, usually I do have an excuse because I want to get the hell out.
You got kids and a wife.
Yeah, well, that and where I work. I don't want to stay where I work and everything. But
that's true.
I want to touch on one thing really quickly before we move on, and that's that when we were playing these games, things just seemed really cool. We've talked about this before, walking over a wooden bridge that was over water, or seeing a waterfall, or ramping something. Those things were just so cool back in the day, and it's become stuff that we expect nowadays, and that's just, it's really a bummer that we expect so much, like, the stuff that was so cool back in the day, it's just like a given for us now, and we don't appreciate it. And that's just, we'll never get that back. But during that time period, we did have it, and that was very cool. But, anyways, life was simpler as a kid. We all know that if your life is simpler as an adult, hit us up behind the scenes. We wouldn't know what you're doing right. But
I didn't know the secret.
Yeah. Even though life was simpler as a kid, so were games. And we kind of talked about simplicity, like in retro games, and just we're not talking about difficulty here because these games, most of them were difficult. But there are some simplicity concepts that we want to talk about. And Red, I want to kick it to you right here. What made these games so simple?
This is going to be a little bit of a boring answer, I think. But to me, the simplicity really just comes down to the technology at the time. Game developers back then couldn't do much. You've got like an 8-bit cartridge or a 16-bit cartridge compared to now. You get games that are 100 freaking gigs or bigger that we download. So back then, games had to be simple. And I don't mean, like we said, I don't mean simple in terms of difficulty, because games back then could be freaking hard. But just in terms of the mechanics and the graphics and the level design, they were not complex. You didn't have open world games back in the 80s and 90s. The closest thing you had may have been something like A Link to the Past or one of the Final Fantasy games, because they were bigger overworlds. I get that, but they weren't true open world games like you think of today. So it's the boring answer, but it's the answer that makes the most sense. Like, the simplicity really just comes down to the technological limitations. And I do say there is a part of me that misses simple game controllers. Like, I absolutely love the Xbox One and the Xbox One, the Series X controllers. I'm a little hit or miss on the, the DualShock and then the Pro controller. But back then, in the Nintendo era, you had a D-pad and you had A, B, start and select. And start and select didn't do shit in your game except pause your game and save your game. So you had A to jump and B to shoot. Those were your buttons. Or like one punches and one kick.
I felt sorry for Select though, man, because Select didn't get a lot of love back in the day.
It didn't do shit back in the day.
Like, you're talking about it being like a save function for what, Zelda, and that's it, basically?
Probably. But just, just the limitations of technology. But I do miss like the controls being so simple. Nowadays, I feel like you got to go into that pause menu and look at the controls on games, and you're like, oh wow, this is the controls when I'm walking. This is the controls when I'm driving a vehicle. This is the controls when I'm flying. You're like, and you can change them all, which is good. I like the flexibility and I like the complexity of modern games, but there's something to be said for firing up a game and you can figure out in 30 seconds what every button does, because you have 2 buttons to choose from. So, and you may accidentally jump into a pit or something when you were trying to run, but it happens, but to me, like, I do kind of miss that simplicity of game design.
Agreed.
And think about games back then too. Everything was like just a side scroller game for the most part. You had like, you think of like the Mario games, of course, like, Zelda was a little bit of an innovation, but it was still, screen to screen to screen. Like games like, Turtles in Time, Battletoads, Double Dragon. They were just these side scrolling beat 'em up games. Like, that was a huge genre back then. And it was in arcades too. And a little bit of a side tangent, man. This is my cheap plug for Streets of Rage 4, which is on Switch, Xbox, PC, and PlayStation. Fucking me and the girlfriend played the shit out of that game. So much fun. Retro look, but with like modern graphics, but still like retro 2D, amazing music. Like, such a good throwback to just old side-scrolling beat-em-up games. And anyways,
I heard you talking about this, but I never really looked into it. And then I was preparing for this podcast today, and I kept on seeing Streets of Rage. I'm like, man, Red's been talking about this game for quite a while, so I'm going to check out this game. Now, Red, I'm having a little issue behind the scenes here. I am by a window, and this sun is poking right through this little like hole right towards my eye, but I can't move because the microphone's in front of me. So, anyways, good thing we're talking retro gaming. Man. I can't see the outline anymore because I'm freaking blinded. But anyways, here's where simplicity. Like, there's a lot of different simplicity points, but no DLC, no patches, no updates. Like, you get a game nowadays, and it's not the full game. Now, I understand. I absolutely love gaming nowadays. And at the very end of the podcast, we will talk about why we don't play retro games that much. So, obviously, I love new games, but just get a game right out of the box. And that's the game. And that's the game you play all the way through.
Yep.
That right there is
bugs and all.
Yeah, that is simplicity. Oh yeah, bugs. There's still some bugs, but not like there's today now.
They don't get fixed. You play with the bugs. I mean, you deal with it.
Exactly. You learn how to use the bugs to your advantage, which is what we call speedrunning nowadays.
Hell yeah, those people are freaking amazing.
That goes to the simplicity right there, and the reason we had this, DLC patches, bugs, updates to fix those bugs is because games nowadays are more complex, which is the opposite of simplicity. That's what we're talking about here. And then also the systems back then, you can go get an NES or an SNES, you can throw that bitch off a building and let's not get ridiculous. It'll still work.
Like a two-story building.
The point is those systems still work today. I can go get mine and plug them in and I can go right to playing a game. You don't plug in an Xbox for 5 years. Like, you are going to have to do all kinds of updates. Something's going to screw up. You're going to have a different network because you probably moved or got different networks since then. Like, just that simplicity of being able to just start up a system and a game right away.
Plug and play.
That right there.
Plug and play.
Yes, exactly. That is simplicity at its finest. And Red, how about no load times, man? I mean, that right there now. Now, I know you don't have as much on your new Xbox Series X and everything, but not having load times back in the day, absolutely love that. You want to talk? Do you have anything else you kind of want to say? I think we hit on most of our points with simplicity.
Not really. I mean, you were absolutely right though. Like the cartridge you bought, you plugged it in, you fired it up, and you may have had to blow in the cartridge once or twice to get it to work. Yeah. But then it worked. And you dealt, you may hate the occasional bugs, but games were so simple back then, you didn't really have that many bugs. I mean, speedrunners, like you mentioned, have been finding bugs and exploiting them, which I think it blows my mind. It's unbelievable some of these speedruns you see. But anyway, it really is just the plug and play aspect of gaming back then. Like, I've got a 64 in my closet. I could pull it down right now, fire it up, and it will work in 10 seconds. I could fire up Ocarina of Time right now. I don't have to worry about downloads, patches, updates. I do miss that shit 100%. But that was my last thought. Where are you about to go?
I didn't have anything after that, so I guess go to the transition now.
Wow, that may be our worst transition of all time.
Yeah, it's going to be.
But no, we talk about it was simpler back then, but part of that, that simplicity also stems from the fact, it wasn't simple for the developers.
No, it wasn't.
Because nowadays, developers have so much experience and knowledge they can build upon. I mean, there's literally game engines out there the developers can buy off the shelf to build their games. Like Unreal Engine, obviously, is the most popular one, but there's tons of engines out there. People can buy it and create their own games. You didn't have that ability back then in the past. I mean, these people were stuck literally creating this stuff from scratch for the most part. These are the people laying the foundation for video games. So it really forced a level of originality back then.
Yes.
Because you didn't have all these trends that you see now. Every gaming company wasn't chasing the open world trend or the battle royale trend or whatever the current trend is. Back then, people had to be original because there was nothing to pull from. Is that something that you miss from gaming? I know there's still original concepts out there, but do you feel like we've lost a little bit of that?
Oh yeah, the creativity. I don't want to say it's gone because there are a lot of games out there now
that
are creative, but it wasn't like back in the day because back in the day, like you said, you didn't have anything to pull from. You had to be creative. You had to figure out a way to do things. And you talk about buying game engines, like you couldn't do that back in the day. Like Nintendo had to use, what they had, which is I don't know exactly. I don't know about game development, but I guess it'd be mostly coding, which I guess nowadays it probably is a lot of coding, but you know what I'm trying to say there. Like, you just didn't have the resources that you have nowadays. But then, you got to think about, the story, the boss battles, weapons, moves. And even, we talked about music, one being simple. We didn't mention that in the last part. Well, we already mentioned it. It contributed, the sound contributed to the originality because you couldn't just go buy a song. You couldn't put that in an NES or an SNES game. You had to make, these little, synthesizer sounds, and that's all you could do. So that was originality at its best. And then, like I said, the story, boss battles, weapons, moves, you had to think about all that on your own. You didn't have anything to pull from. You couldn't pull anything from Atari. Atari, that was simplicity right there.
Yeah.
But you could not pull anything from Atari. So there was so much originality because you had no other choice. You had to be creative. You had to think of, not just building the game, not just the sound, not just how to make it work, but the stories weren't that great, but there was still, a story. The boss battles, like you had to come up first with the characters, and then also the moves that they were going to have, and then also your moves, not only your boss's moves, and then also the games that had weapons. You had to think about what weapons were you going to have, and how were you going to use them, where were you going to use them, and who were you going to use them against. And you had to think about every single one of those things, whereas today, there's been so many games out there you can pull concepts from all these games. And I'm not mad at the developers because you really can't have much originality because, like The Simpsons says, everything's already, or no, well, that was South Park that said The Simpsons already did it. Everything in video games, I don't know. Like everything in video games is pretty much, for the most part, been done. So you can't get mad at the developers for that. But just having that originality when every franchise that came out during that time was a new franchise. You were not building you're not releasing your 17th Zelda game. Like it was Zelda and it was new and it was just so exciting during that time. And I want to throw it to you right here because I'm hoping you play Star Fox on the SNES. But that right there was one of the first 3D games ever. And so that right there, it's originality.
It is. And that's one thing I love when you look back at old games is the originality really did come from these developers found new ways.
Hold on a second. I feel like this is becoming verticality for us right here. No, we said originality so many times.
The new verticality. But as technology slowly advanced back then, it forced these people to be original and to innovate. And because you think about the Atari, you had Pong or you had Asteroids, where it's one screen. Your whole game takes place on one screen, basically. And then you got to the NES and you had Donkey Kong in the arcades where you had different levels and things were different every different level. Then you got to the NES and you had the side scrolling where each level was a long, not very long by today's standards, of course, but a long flow. And then, like you said, you get to the 3D games, your Star Fox on SNES, your, Doom and Wolfenstein on PC, that first person shooter. And then the jump from there, it's just been leaps and bounds. But back then, they were literally inventing genres and styles on the fly. Zelda, the original Legend of Zelda, I would probably consider the first open world game.
Yes.
You might die if you go somewhere, but you can pretty much go everywhere right from the get-go, which, was a great, coming full circle when Breath of the Wild came out. But, literally, Doom and Wolfenstein invented, first-person shooters. Mario and Donkey Kong invented platformers, 2D platformers. You had to innovate back then because there weren't genres. Now everything gets put into a bucket because that's, it's a mature industry now. The industry's been around since the late 70s, early 80s. And, there's not a lot of ideas. When you hear us talk about a game like Ghost of Tsushima, which, spoiler alert, we're probably going to talk about all next episode. But, it's not so much that Ghost of Tsushima innovates that makes it well, but it just refines and perfects and brings together a lot of things that already existed that makes it a very great game. Back then, we didn't have that. There was no foundation and other games to bring that influence in from. So it blows my mind what these people came up with back then with the limited technology they have. And then they continued to really push the envelope and, like I said, invent completely new genres. It's
why the industry is as big as it is today.
I mean, I'm glad it is.
Yeah, it's all because of them. But, something that's new and original, it's always more memorable, which, that definitely right there contributes to nostalgia. As we're talking about these games, we've mentioned a lot of points of why we love these games.
Right.
But obviously, you got to talk about the main one, quickly, because we don't have much time left. But nostalgia, we have as much time as we want, but we try to keep it to a certain length. But, we talked about our experiences and everything with the game. But really, at its heart, why we love these games so much is the nostalgia aspect. And really, that's all that is taking you back to your childhood and your experiences, as we talked about, as a kid, and just those times. They were so fun, man. I mean, everybody enjoys things when they're kids, whether it's us, NES, SNES, or whether you started with the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2. You always go back to that time period, and it's the nostalgia. And just these games like that 8-bit and that 16-bit graphics, those are just timeless. And that's why you see many indie developers using that style. I said, you don't see indie developers using a PS1 or a PS2 graphic because those graphics look like crap nowadays. But those 8 and 16-bit sprites, those are just timeless. And I think that's why we can still go back and play these games today is because really of the art style and how he went about them. And also, like, I think it actually helps that they were mostly 2D games and not 3D games, because the 3D games look like crap nowadays. And just, I want to throw it to you right here soon, but like, it's just such great memories. And I think you all can hear the passion coming through in this episode, but just going back and talking about these games when we were children, like, there's just so many great memories.
Well, and there really are. And at the end of the day, that's like why this retro gaming is like a very passionate topic for us, even though we don't, and we'll get into this in just a second.
Even though it's saturated.
It is saturated now, and we don't play a lot of it now, which we'll talk about here in just a sec, I promise. But like, it does feel good to go back and look and talk about these games, because they were like part of our foundational years as kids growing up. Not just foundational in terms of as a gamer, but it was part of our lives back then. It was an important part of our lives, whether it was playing with friends, playing with your siblings, or just killing time after school, trying to avoid doing homework, whatever. Games were a big part of our lives back then. And like you said, the 8 and 16-bit style, it is timeless. It really is, because I feel like the later generations suffer from that, because as companies and developers strive to make more and more realistic features, you really hit that like uncanny valley in some instances where you're like, it's close to being realistic, but just far enough off that it's kind of off-putting a little bit. And we're kind of getting over that hurdle now that, like, the technology is so far advanced, but there was probably a good 15 years there, like you talk about, from the PlayStation through, probably the PlayStation 4, the Xbox 360, or the Xbox One, where it's like they came really close to making it look photorealistic, but it's just enough off that it fucks with your head.
Yeah.
So to me, those old graphics, that, it is timeless. That old music is timeless. And I'm glad to see indie developers are trying to recapture that. Plus, it's cheaper for them to develop that than it is to develop a AAA game. But, but it is a big industry right now. So I'm a big fan of it. That nostalgia factor is strong. It does harken back to our younger days, like I said, playing with our friends, playing with our family.
And it's so cool that we can play these games like on a virtual console, like the NES, NES, and the SNES Classic. I don't believe there's one for Sega Genesis. Not really confident on that, but if there's not, they need to get on it. But then, you got emulators, and we've kind of talked about Nintendo. You need to release a streaming device with your entire library one day.
It would sell like gangbusters.
Will kill it, but anyways.
That would get my $10 a month. That would get my $10 a month.
Easily. And they keep on raising it like Netflix. You know how this works.
Fucking Netflix.
We talked about how these games mean so much to us, but we don't actually play a lot of retro games these days. And we'll kind of go into this discussion right here, why we don't play them that much. And a lot of the reason for me is they're too damn hard. Now, there's a lot of these indie games, and like, Ori and the Blind Forest, I never played Will the Wisp because Ori and the Blind Forest was too hard. Unravel, Celeste. Like, but a lot of those older games, they were very difficult. And so that's one reason why I don't go back and play those games. Red, how about you? Give some reasons why you don't play retro games so much these days.
Modern games take so much time.
Yep.
Modern games, it's hard to sit down with a 10-hour game anymore. Like, because they just don't make that many of them. Everything is like padded out to be 30 or 40 hours. Or if it's an open world game, you're talking 100 hours, 150 hours. Like, I've been excited. I've been like playing Gears of War 4 and 5, just to try out the new Xbox Series X, of course. But then B, it's like they're also quick games. Like the single player campaign for those is like 8 to 10 hours.
Yep.
And which, granted, for a retro game would be an eternity, but for a modern game now, it's like 8 to 10 hours seems like a blink of an eye. I can beat that in a weekend.
Yes.
And modern games take...
weekend. Yeah, you don't have kids, do you?
Nope, I'm good there. Yeah. But no, it's like, it just takes so much time to play our modern games. But let's also be honest, modern games are awesome too. Like, there are a lot of amazing AAA games that we love to play. Every few months, we're getting one that we're like, I was excited for this. I was excited for this. I was excited for this. So we just don't have the time to go back and play old games. Like I said, every now and then I'll get a few beers in me and think, I want to go fire up the old Wii, hit up the virtual console and play, Final Fantasy IV, whatever. I'll play it for a few hours and the next day I'll be like, why the fuck did I do that?
Yeah, for me, like I always do that, but then I play it for like no longer than 30 minutes. I play for like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, I got my fix. I'm good now.
That's all you needed.
Yeah, in those older games, the save system is not as good. Now, I know there's things like the 3DS restore points, and there's also some other ways that they have improved the save systems, but there's still a couple games out there where the save system is not so great, and we've kind of talked about how we don't have time. I'm not going to go back and redo stuff. Like, I will bash a game now, like a new game nowadays. If you make me go back and do anything, new Super Lucky's Tale, you were great at keeping my progress throughout the entire game, even when I died, and I love you for that. That's why, I could give you better than an 8.8, but like we kind of talked about right here, there are games that are just so like complex and just so big that like they're just a little bit better. But also, like, and the last thing I want to say is there's not always the best way of playing them. Yeah, on the Switch we do have the some of us that have Nintendo Switch Online. You can buy a damn new next gen console, but you still can't pay $20 for a yearly subscription.
Yeah, because I just spent $500 on a new console.
You can play some NES and some SNES games on that, but if they're not on that, like we're talking about going back to the Wii U, going back to the 3DS, you might not always have access to those. So still, like, I mean, you can play them in certain places, but it's still not the easiest things unless they're on the Nintendo Switch. Because, I mean, I still have my Wii U out, but I'm guessing there's a lot of people that when they got the Nintendo Switch, their Wii U, it probably went out back in the corner or in the closet or wherever you put a system that failed that bad.
In a shoebox in the closet, yeah.
Yeah, that's some of the reasons. And we all agree on, like, I agree with a lot of the reasons that you used. But that's why we don't play them that much. But this episode,
Time's a big one, man.
This episode, I knew it was going to be a lot of fun. And I think that you all saw the passion that we have. And even though we don't play retro games that much, it doesn't mean that we haven't lost that love of retro games and that we don't, like, we're very appreciative of our childhood and what these game developers gave us. So, mostly Nintendo here. Thank you, Nintendo, for what you gave us as a child. But, Red, do you have any final thoughts you want to throw out?
No, I mean, that's really it. It's like, it's fun to look back on these games because they were such important parts of our lives back then. And we may not go back and replay them now, but we never forget them. We never forget them at the end of the day. And they really are absolutely timeless. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode because we went over by a few minutes. We apologize there. So all links for this here will be down in the description for this podcast. Support us on Patreon or PayPal if you want to. If you can't, be sure to leave us a rating or a review. We always appreciate 5-star ratings, even if you don't think we're 5-star quality. Go ahead and lie,
baby.
We'll
don't lie.
And we also have a couple of websites. We have 2guysplayingzelda.com, tgpzgaming.com that are great merchandise for gaming and for Zelda on those two sites. We may earn a commission on them because they're affiliate websites. But how about you go ahead and talk about where we are on YouTube and social media?
And we got 2 YouTube channels. We got one for 2 Guys Playing Zelda, which has over 10,000 subscribers. Don't do much on that channel anymore, but we used to do a lot back in the day, have a lot of videos. TGPC Gaming is basically just where we put our podcast nowadays. You can find us on Discord. We always recommend, like, continue the conversation with us about gaming on our Discord. We're always talking Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, PC, and they also have some other topics that we go into on there. So if we can tell you to join anything, follow us, subscribe, whatever, go check our discount. Go check out our Discord and join that and continue the conversation with us off of the podcast. And then we're also on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Busted Buns PC. But man, this was a blast.
Yes,
had a lot of fun talking retro gaming. Me and Red have been talking about the behind the scenes. It is time to talk Ghost of Tsushima. So
hell yeah.
Next episode, Ghost of Tsushima, all episode long. It's going to be a ton of fun, and we will see you on that next episode.